Priestley's conclusion is more analytical and historical, evoking the different overlapping layers of English history. Old England, industrial England, and new consumerist England, and pointing the finger of blame firmly at financial capitalism. I quote, "This money-lending England," unquote, and its betrayal of productive industry, a theme which is entirely absent from Orwell. There are no solutions in either conclusion, but in Priestley's there is at least an attempt at a holistic, historically based understanding, one arising out of the radical tradition in its particular view of the nation as the people, struggling for their birthright against the parasitic, privileged class, and as such not passive victims but potentially makers of history. Orwell, having rejected that privileged class, eaten in the empire, and their taken for granted version of Englishness, Church of England, monarchy, Toryism, public school education, and state or imperial service, has to work his way painfully towards a new understanding of the nation, which finally starts to appear during the war in works such as The Lion of the Unicorn, when he begins to see the nation in terms of shared characteristics rooted in the ordinary people. But Priestley was there first. Indeed, he was always there, and this, it seems to me, is what makes English Journey a better book than William Peer. Not only a better book, but one which, on account of its author's popularity, sold a lot more copies. One thing which made English Journey more inclusive in tone and less concerned with the personal preoccupations of its author and people like him was that Priestley was addressing a larger and broader leadership. Have I got any more? I think 10 more minutes. Okay, so I'll finish before the deadline. I don't know if it's because I'm speaking too fast or the paper is not that long. I don't know. This could be. Okay, so the war sent Priestley into hyperactive mode with radio broadcasts, journalism, novels, plays, political agitation through the Socialist Commonwealth Party, which we discussed yesterday, I think, or was it this morning? I don't remember. The Commonwealth Party, which he helped to found and which Orwell welcomed but actually did not join. His radio postscripts, beginning in June 1940 at the moment of Dunkirk, proved immensely popular and expressed Priestley's conviction, shared by Orwell, that the war presented the opportunity, indeed the necessity, for radical change. Although, unlike Orwell, Priestley did not believe that without a revolution the war would be lost. Some people, he told his listeners in July 1940, seem to think that this war is about getting back to how things were. But, I quote, "There's nothing that really worked that we can go back to," unquote. Rather, we should go forward and, I quote, "plan and build up a nobler world in which ordinary decent folk can find justice and security," unquote. Already, he argued, the war was changing us from a society based on property to one based on community. There was stirring, he argued, I quote, "a passionate determination to remodel and recreate this life of ours to make it the glorious beginning of a new world order," unquote. Orwell, writing to Partisan Review 6 months later, described the summer of 1940 in almost identical terms. There had been, I quote, "a widespread readiness for sweeping economic and social changes, the opportunity to isolate the modern class and destroy class privilege. But the moment had been lost. The reactionaries had survived by the skin of their teeth and were consolidating their position." In a newspaper article published just 2 days before that letter was written, Priestley also detected, I quote, "very definite traces of reaction, attempts to force the nation to beat a retreat from real, vital democracy," unquote. Later in 1941, in his pamphlet, Out of the People, Priestley pointed out that the war was being fought not by the old ruling class, but by industrial England, I quote Priestley, "machines and the men who make and drive those machines," unquote. In fact, the technicians and skilled workers, airmen and mechanics, radio experts, industrial chemists celebrated in Orwell's The Lion and the Unicorn, which was also published in 1941. England, Priestley argued, had been held back by, I quote, "sterility and decay, behind a tattered facade of tradition," unquote. "The heirs of Nelson and Cromwell," said Orwell, "could be found in the streets, factories and pubs, but were, I quote, kept under by a generation of ghosts," unquote, the old ruling class. "A New England," proclaimed Priestley, quoting Walt Whitman, "could be born," I quote, "out of the people, everyday people, the people as you find them, and leave them." unquote. It is clear that Orwell's and Priestley's conceptions of the war and of the people fighting it and of the opportunity for change it offered were virtually identical and rest upon a conception of national character rooted in the ordinary people. This was not a new idea, as Peter Mandler and others have shown the little man as the archetypal Englishman was a common image in the 1920s and 30s. But while Orwell had to work his way towards this position, for Priestley it was embedded in his political and ideological heritage. Okay, so we need to be reminded that although Orwell has become so huge a figure, in whose shade no other can flourish, his was not a lonely voice of reason, as some would like to think, but drew upon discourses and debates which were there before him and to which he was sometimes a latecomer. Despite their marked similarities, their fundamentally different cultural positions prevented Orwell and Priestley from being allies. These were, to quote my subtitle, two ways of being a left-wing writer. Orwell's way was to work from within a minority culture outwards towards a hope for a broader constituency, which he eventually, though posthumously, achieved, the classic strategy of the socialist intellectual. Priestley's, however, was to stand foursquare on the popular and, following his own political and social instincts, to use his large following to promote his radical view, whatever the highbrows thought of him. Although the agonized individual working his painful way towards the truth is always a more attractive figure to intellectuals like us than the rich and famous popular novelist with a mission, we may have something to learn from both of them. Thank you.